The mining colony on Terminus 7 had been quiet for 3 days when Captain Maya Brooks got the distress signal, and her ship called the Wanderer dropped out of hyperspace to find the settlement. A dome, broken like glass with all its buildings, turned into shiny ash that glowed under the twin suns, and Maya had seen many destroyed places before, but nothing like this, because the destruction looked almost beautiful, like someone had painted it with care and purpose instead of just blowing things up randomly. Danny Carter was her pilot, and he whispered about what could have done such a thing, but Maya had no answer for him, because in all her years traveling space, she had never witnessed anything quite like this level of complete annihilation. And that was when the woman appeared, walking out of the desert heat like she owned the entire planet in her skin. Seemed to glow with its own light somewhere between starlight and moonbeam, with pointed ears rising through silver hair that moved. Even though there was no wind, and her eyes burned with violet fire that made Maya feel afraid deep in her bones behind. The strange woman, something massive, moved through the sky, and at first Maya thought it was another ship coming to land. But then she saw the wings spreading wide with membranes stretched across bone, and each beat of those wings created pressure waves that shook the Wanderer hull and made alarms go off inside, and the dragon descended beside its mistress with scales that shifted through colors that should not exist in nature and reflected light from parts of the spectrum that human eyes were not designed to see properly. The woman spoke, and her voice carried across the wasteland without any technology to amplify it, and she said her name was Celeste, and that this world had refused to pay tribute. So this destruction was the consequence of that refusal, and Maya crew had already rushed to their battle stations with weapons locking onto the target and shields, going to maximum power, and every tactical system on the ship screamed warnings that they were facing something that could end their existence in moments. But Maya stepped forward without any weapons in her hands and walked down the landing ramp toward the woman and dragon and her first officer. Lauren Hayes shouted at her not to go, but Maya ignored the warning because something deep in her gut told her that showing fear was exactly the wrong thing to do in this situation, and that instinct had kept her alive through many dangerous encounters before she stopped about 10 meters away from Celeste, and the dragon eye was so large that each iris was bigger than Maya, the entire body, and it tracked her movement with the focus of a predator, watching potential prey, and Maya could feel the heat coming off the creature even from this distance, and smell something like burning metal mixed with ozone. Celeste looked at Maya with those burning violet eyes and said that everyone feared her. And it was not said like a boast or a threat, but just as a simple statement of fact delivered with the tiredness of someone who had heard the same terrified screams across 1,000 different worlds and expected to hear them again. Maya met those strange eyes directly and said that she did not fear Celeste, and for the first time in what must have been centuries, the elf woman looked genuinely surprised by what she heard, because no one had spoken to her like that in longer than she could. Remember, the dragon shifted its massive weight and made a sound deep in its throat like distant thunder, and Maya crew was still shouting at her through the communication device in her ear, telling her to get back to the ship immediately. But she stood her ground because she knew that running now would mean death for everyone, and standing still might give them a chance at survival. Celeste tilted her head slightly like she was studying some strange new species of insect that had just done something unexpected and interesting, and she asked Maya why she did not fear her when she had just destroyed an entire colony of 3,000 people in less time than it took to breathe. Maya told her that fear would not change anything, and that if Celeste wanted to kill them, she would have done it already instead of talking, and that meant there was something else happening here. Beyond simple conquest and destruction, the elf woman took a step closer, and reality seemed to bend around her, like she was too large for the space she occupied, and carried her own gravity that pulled at everything nearby. And Maya could feel power radiating from Celeste like heat from a star, and knew that this being could unmake her with a single thought. But Maya did not step back or look away, because she understood that this moment would decide everything, and that showing weakness now would doom her crew and possibly her entire species if this creature decided humans were not worth keeping alive. Celeste spoke again and said that Maya was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and that she had not decided which yet, and the dragon behind her made that rumbling sound again, like it was laughing at some private joke that only it and its mistress understood. Maya said that maybe she was both brave and stupid, But that did not change the fact that she was not afraid, and that Celeste seemed tired of being feared all the time, and maybe that was why she had not killed them yet, because it was boring to always see the same terror in every face. The elf woman's eyes widened slightly at that observation, and for a moment, Maya saw something underneath the power and the threat and the violence, and it looked almost like loneliness, or maybe sadness. But then it was gone again, hidden behind that mask of cold beauty and ancient power. Celeste turned away from Maya and looked at the ruins of the colony spreading out around them, and said that these people had families and lives and dreams, and now they were gone because they made the wrong choice and refused to give her what she needed. Maya asked what Celeste needed so badly that she was willing to destroy entire worlds to get it, and the elf woman was quiet for a long time before she said that Maya would not understand even if she explained it, because humans were too young and too small to grasp the scope of what was coming. The dragon spread its wings again, and Maya could see through the membrane to the twin suns beyond, creating patterns of light and shadow that hurt to look at directly, and Celeste said that Maya should get back in her ship and leave this system and tell her people that the Pale Queen had come and gone, and that everyone who saw her either died or fled. In terror, Maya asked why Celeste did not just kill her if that was the story she wanted told, and the elf woman turned back with those burning eyes and said that Maya intrigued her, and that she was either the bravest fool she had ever met, or someone who saw something that Celeste herself had forgotten how to see. Captain knew she should leave and take the gift of continued life and run as fast as her ship could go. But instead she asked one more question and wanted to know who Celeste was. Running from, because all of this felt like fear disguised as conquest. The effect was immediate and dramatic as Celeste's entire body went rigid, and the dragon tensed like it was preparing to attack. And when the elf woman turned back, her eyes blazed with something beyond anger or rage, and it looked more like grief that had been burning for so long it had turned into something else entirely. Celeste told Maya to get off this world immediately, and her voice carried a threat that made the air itself vibrate with potential violence. But Maya had seen the truth in that moment of reaction, and she knew that her guess was correct, and that this being was not conquering out of desire for power, but out of desperate fear of something even worse. As the Wanderer lifted off from the dead colony, Maya looked back at Celeste standing alone in the wasteland with her dragon beside her, and the elf woman was watching the ship leave with an expression that might have been respect or might have been regret, and Maya knew that she had just made either the best decision of her life or the worst one, and only time would tell which. The entire galaxy knew Celeste by many different names, and most of them were spoken in whispers, because people feared that saying her name too loudly might draw her attention and bring destruction down upon them, and she was called the Pale Queen, and the Starlight Tyrant, and the Dragon Herald, among many other titles that reflected the terror she inspired across hundreds of worlds. She had appeared 20 years ago at the edge of civilized space, riding her dragon called Sorrow through the void as easily as normal people breathed air. An entire military fleets had been reduced to floating debris fields in minutes, and worlds that tried to resist her demands became monuments of ash and glass that served as warnings to others about the price of defiance. Pattern was always exactly the same, no matter which world she visited, and she would arrive without warning and demand immediate submission along with regular tribute payments, and those who refused to bow would face complete annihilation, while those who accepted her terms kept their lives but lost their freedom as their resources flowed away to some distant empire that no one had ever seen or knew anything about. Now, as Maya stood on the bridge of the Wanderer watching the dead colony of Terminus 7 disappear behind them, she could not stop thinking about that moment when Celeste's face had changed and shown something unexpected underneath all that power and threat, and it looked like pain or maybe loneliness. And Maya knew that she had seen something important, even if she did not fully understand what it meant. Yet her First Officer Lauren Hayes came to stand beside her and asked if Maya had lost her mind going down there alone and unarmed to face something that had just killed 3,000 people without breaking a sweat. And Maya said that maybe she had lost her mind, but that instinct told her it was the right choice, and that fear would have gotten them all killed. Danny Carter turned from his pilot station and said they should jump to hyperspace immediately, put as much distance as possible between their ship and that creature before she changed her mind about letting them live. But Maya shook her head and said they were not running away just yet because she needed to understand what was really happening. Here Lauren asked what Maya meant, and the captain explained that. Celeste's reaction to that final question about who she was running from told them everything they needed to know, and that this was not simple conquest or empire building, but something else entirely, and something that involved fear on a scale. They could barely imagine the crew looked at Maya like she was crazy, and maybe she was, but she had survived this long in space by trusting her instincts, and right now, those instincts were screaming that there was more to this story than anyone realized, and that understanding the truth might be the key to saving countless lives. Maya ordered Danny to set course for Blackport Station instead of jumping to hyperspace, and the pilot hesitated before following orders because Blackport was known as a place where information could be bought and sold if you had enough credits and knew the right people to ask. And Maya knew someone there who might have answers about Celeste and where she came from. The journey took 3 days, and during that time, Maya could not stop reviewing the sensor recordings from Terminus 7 and studying every detail of Celeste's appearance and the way she moved and spoke and carried herself, because there had to be clues hidden in those details about who this being really was underneath all the terror. Lauren came to Maya quarters on the second day and sat down without being invited and said that the crew was worried about their captain obsession with the Pale Queen and that maybe they should just file their report. Let the military handle whatever was happening out here on the frontier. Maya asked Lauren if she really thought the military could handle something like Celeste when entire fleets had already been destroyed trying to fight her, and Lauren admitted that probably no military force in the galaxy could stop that woman and her dragon, which was exactly why they should stay far away from her. But Maya said that running and hiding would not save anyone in the long term, and that if Celeste was building towards something bigger, then they needed to understand what it was before it was too late to stop it or prepare for it. And Lauren sighed and said that Maya had always been too brave for her own good, but that the crew would follow her wherever she decided to go. Blackport Station appeared on their sensors on the third day, and it looked like a massive metal flower blooming in the darkness of space, with dozens of docking arms reaching out in all directions and ships of every size and design clustered around it like bees around a hive. Maya took a shuttle down alone because the kind of information she needed could only be bought in person, and bringing her whole crew would draw too much attention and make the information brokers nervous and less willing to talk freely. The station interior was exactly as she remembered, with narrow corridors that smelled of recycled air and cooking food from a dozen different species, and the constant sound of people talking and arguing and making deals in shadowy corners where the security cameras did not quite reach. Ruth Chen had been an information broker for longer than Maya had been alive, and her cybernetic eye could see things that normal vision missed. And she sat in the back corner of a bar that catered to people who wanted to avoid attention, and when Maya sat down across from her, the old woman smiled and said she had been expecting this visit. Maya asked how Ruth could have been expecting her when she had only decided to come here 2 days ago, and Ruth tapped her cybernetic eye and said that information traveled fast in her business, and that word had already spread about a human captain who confronted the Pale Queen and lived to tell about it. The broker said that kind of story drew attention and made people curious about what kind of fool would stand in front of Celeste without showing fear, and Maya said she was that kind of fool, and that she needed information about where the Pale Queen came from and what she really wanted. Laughed and said that was a dangerous question to ask, and that plenty of people had died just for being too curious about Celeste's origins. But Maya slid credit chips across the table until the old woman stopped laughing and started talking instead. The broker explained that there had been survivors from the first world Celeste attacked 20 years ago, and that it was a research colony called Avalon 9 on the galactic rim, where scientists studied ancient artifacts and precursor technology from civilizations that existed before any current species evolved. One research team found something they called a gate, and it was some kind of portal to somewhere else entirely, and when they managed to open it, Celeste came through with her dragon right behind her, and behind them was fire and Destruction like an entire civilization burning, Ruth said. The surviving researchers reported that Celeste sealed the gate from this side using powers that made their equipment melt just from being near her, and that she never spoke about where she came from or what she was running from. But the look on her face told them everything they needed to know about the horror she had left behind. Maya felt cold understanding spreading through her as she realized that Celeste was not invading their galaxy but escaping from something worse, and that all the tribute she demanded and all the resources she gathered were being used to build some kind of defense against whatever had destroyed her. Ruth stood up and said that the credit Chips had bought Maya information that would probably get her killed, and that she should forget everything she just heard and go back to her normal life. Before curiosity led her somewhere she could not escape from, but Maya could not forget, because if Celeste was preparing defenses against something powerful enough to destroy an entire civilization, then what would happen when those defenses failed, and that enemy came through into their galaxy looking for new worlds to burn? She returned to. The Wanderer defined her crew in emergency formation, and Lauren practically running toward her, saying they had a serious problem because Celeste had followed them to Blackport and was waiting outside the station, just floating in empty space without any protection. Maya rushed to the observation deck and saw the elf woman hanging in the void, surrounded by a shimmer of energy with no suit or ship to keep her alive, and Sorrow was coiled around a nearby asteroid watching the station with eyes that glowed like small stars. The captain ordered her crew to open a communication channel, and Celeste's voice filled the bridge asking why Maya had been investigating her and talking to information brokers about things that should remain secret. Maya said that she wanted to help because it was clear that Celeste was not their real enemy and that something worse was coming. Possibly due against forces that could destroy entire universes. Captain said that humans had a talent for surviving impossible situations and for finding solutions to problems that seemed unsolvable, and that maybe Celeste needed that kind of thinking if she was going to stop whatever was coming. Celeste was quiet for a long time before saying that she could just kill Maya and her entire crew to keep her secret safe, and Maya agreed that was true, but pointed out that if Celeste was going to do that, she would have done it already back on Terminus 7 instead of following them here. The moon's surface was cold and airless, with ancient craters covering every visible section, and Maya's shuttle touched down near one of the larger impact sites where Celeste waited with Sorrow, massive form, creating a second shadow under the distant sun of this system. Maya stepped out wearing her pressure suit, but Celeste made a simple gesture with her hand, and suddenly Maya could breathe normally as reality itself bent to the elf woman will and created a pocket of atmosphere and warmth that should not exist in this airless place. Celeste looked at Maya with those burning violet eyes and said that what she was about to reveal would either save Maya people or doom them, and that there was no middle ground between those two outcomes. And Maya said she understood the risk, but wanted to hear the truth anyway. Elfwoman looked up at the stars scattered across the black sky, and for the first time, Maya saw her as something other than a conqueror or destroyer, and instead she looked tired and ancient and sad, like someone who had been carrying an impossible burden for far too long. Celeste began speaking, said that her people called themselves the Ilari, and they were the first children of their universe and masters of what humans would call magic, but was really just a deeper understanding of how reality worked at its most fundamental level. For 10,000 years, the Ilari shaped existence itself and built wonders that would make entire human civilizations weep with envy, and they thought they were like gods because nothing could challenge them, and they grew proud and careless in their power. She explained that they opened doors that should have stayed closed forever and peered into the spaces between dimensions because they wanted to understand everything, and something peered back at them from those dark spaces, and that something was hungry. Maya asked what they had found, and Celeste said it was called the Void Collective, and the name itself felt wrong when spoken aloud, like it carried some kind of curse or poison, and these entities existed outside normal reality in a place where the usual rules did not apply. The Void Collective did not conquer worlds the way normal armies did, because they did something much worse, and they erased entire planets from existence so completely that no one could even remember they had ever been there. and they consumed not just matter and energy, but concepts and memories, and the very idea that something had existed. Sorrow rumbled deep in its throat, and the sound carried pain and loss that was ancient beyond measure. And Celeste reached out to touch her dragon scales with obvious affection and said they had fought the Void Collective for 100 years while watching their universe die, piece by piece. Every victory cost the Ilari entire worlds, and every defeat cost them dimensions, and in the end, they had only one choice left, and that was to seal their universe away from the place where the Void Collective lived, and prayed that the barriers would hold forever. But creating that kind of seal required enormous power, and someone had to weave it, and anchor it with their own life force. And Celeste was the one who volunteered because she was the strongest of her people, and the only one who might survive the process. She sealed her universe away from the Void Collective, and then crossed through the last stable gate before it closed forever, and brought only sorrow with her, because the dragon refused to be left behind, and they came to this new universe hoping to finally rest and be safe. Maya asked the question she already knew the answer to, and wanted to know if the seal was failing, and Celeste nodded slowly and said that 20 years ago she felt the first crack in the barrier, and by her calculations, it would completely collapse in approximately 5 years. When that happened, the Void Collective would pour through into this universe like water through a broken dam, and they would find everything fresh and untouched and full of life to consume, and there was nothing in this galaxy that could stop them because no one here had ever faced anything like them before. The captain felt the weight of entire galaxies pressing down on her as she understood the true scope of what Celeste had been trying to do. And she asked about the tributes and resources and what the elf woman was building with all of it. Celeste explained that her people had designed one last weapon before their universe fell, and it was a device that could seal dimensional rifts permanently and prevent the Void Collective from ever crossing over. But the Ilari never had time to build it before they were overwhelmed. Now she was trying to construct that weapon here in this universe, but it required materials from across the entire galaxy and technologies that most species had not invented yet, and power sources that could fuel entire civilizations for centuries. Maya understood then that Celeste was not building an empire at all, but rather preparing a last desperate defense against an enemy that no one else even knew existed, and every life she had taken and every world she had burned was mercy compared to what the Void Collective would do if they broke through. The captain asked how much time they had to build the weapon, and Celeste said approximately 3 years. If everything went perfectly and nothing went wrong, but she also said that things always went wrong. And that 3 years was probably optimistic. Maya asked what would happen if they failed to build the weapon in time, and Celeste looked at her with eyes that had watched universes die and said that every species in this galaxy would cease to have ever existed because the Void Collective did not just kill you, but erase the fact that you were ever born there. There was a long silence between them as Maya processed everything she had learned and understood that this was bigger than anything humanity had ever faced, and that their usual solutions and strategies would be completely useless against an enemy like this. But then Maya made a decision that would change everything, and she told Celeste that she would help her build the weapon, and that not just Maya personally, but all of humanity would help if they could be convinced that the threat was real. Celeste asked what Maya would do if her people did not believe her and refused to help, and the captain smiled grimly and said that making people believe uncomfortable truths was what leaders did, and that she would find a way to convince them. The elf woman studied Maya face for a long time, as if trying to determine whether this human was serious or just speaking brave words that would disappear when things got difficult. And then she asked why Maya was willing to help someone who had killed so many people. Maya said it was because those deaths would mean nothing if the Void Collective destroyed everything anyway, and that the only way to honor the people who died was to make sure their sacrifice bought enough time to save everyone else. Celeste looked surprised by that answer and said that she had not thought about it that way before, and that maybe humans had wisdom that the Ilari had lacked because her people were so focused on their own power and knowledge that they forgot about simple things like honor and sacrifice. The elf woman said that if Maya was serious about helping, then the first step would be convincing the United Galactic Council to listen, because they controlled most of the resources and technology that would be needed and they would never trust Celeste, after everything she had done, Maya agreed that would be the hardest part, but said she had contacts in the council and that humans were good at forming alliances when survival was at stake, and that fear of extinction could overcome almost any. Other concerns, Celeste warned that they only had 5 years before the seal failed completely, and that building the weapon would take at least 3 years, which meant they had almost no time for politics or arguments or delays. The captain said she understood the timeline and would work as fast as possible, but that convincing. 47 different species to cooperate would not happen overnight, and that Celeste needed to be patient and let Maya handle the diplomatic side of things. The elf woman agreed reluctantly and said that patience had never been her strength, but that she would try to trust Maya's judgment on this because humans seemed to understand cooperation in ways that the Aleri never had. They made plans to meet again in 3 months, and by then Maya would have presented the evidence to the council, and hopefully convinced at least some of them to listen, and Celeste said she would continue gathering resources in the meantime, but would try to avoid destroying any more worlds if possible. As Maya walked back to her shuttle, she turned and asked one more question and wanted to know why Celeste had not killed her back on Terminus 7 when she first asked her uncomfortable questions. The elf woman was quiet for a moment before answering, and said that for the first time in 20 years, someone had looked at her and not seen a monster, but instead saw someone who was afraid and alone and trying to save people. Who hated her. Maya said that Celeste was not alone anymore, and that now she had at least one ally who understood what was at stake, and the elf woman almost smiled as she watched the human shuttle lift off and disappear into the black sky above. Maya spent 3 months gathering evidence and building her case, and it was harder than anything she had ever done because she was asking people to trust the word of someone who had destroyed their worlds and killed their families, and that kind of trust did not come easily or quickly. She traveled to 17 different systems and met with military leaders and government officials and anyone who had power or influence, and she showed them the sensor recordings from Terminus 7 and the data from Ruth's information network, and most importantly, she told them about what Celeste had revealed on that airless moon most people thought Maya was insane, or lying, or somehow being controlled by the Pale Queen, and they refused to listen. Beyond the first few minutes, and some even threatened to arrest her for treason or collaboration with the enemy, but Maya kept trying because she knew that time was running out, and that in 5 years everyone she was talking to would be erased from existence if they did not act now, and sometimes that knowledge made her angry at their blindness, and other times it just made her tired. Lauren stayed with her through all of it, even though she did not fully believe Maya's story at first, and the first officer said that even if the captain was wrong about the Void Collective, she was right that Celeste's behavior did not make sense for a simple conqueror. The breakthrough came when Maya managed to get an audience with the full United Galactic Council, and that required calling in every favor she'd ever earned and making promises she was not sure she could keep, but finally they agreed to listen. Meeting took place on a diplomatic station at the galaxy core, and it was a massive structure that housed representatives from 47 different species, and all of them looked at Maya with suspicion when she walked into the council chamber. But Maya did not walk in alone, and beside her was Celeste in all her terrible beauty, and the elf woman made no attempt to appear less threatening or more friendly, and sorrow waited outside, visible through the station viewports, as a constant reminder of the power that Celeste commanded. The council chamber erupted in shouts and accusations. As soon as they saw Celeste, and security forces rushed forward with weapons drawn, but Maya held up her hand and asked for just 1 hour to explain everything before anyone made decisions. Ambassador Kate Morrison represented the core human worlds, and she had known Maya for years and trusted her judgment more than most, and she called for order and said they should at least hear what their own captain had to say. Maya began speaking and told them about her encounter on Terminus 7, and about what she had learned from Ruth, and most importantly about what Celeste had revealed regarding the Void Collective and the failing seal and the weapon they needed to build the council members listened, but their faces showed disbelief and anger, and one ambassador from the Krillian species, whose world had been attacked by Celeste, stood up and demanded to know why they should trust someone who had killed so many of their people. Celeste spoke then, and her voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk, and she said that she had destroyed worlds and killed millions and given them every reason to hate her, but that hatred would not stop what was coming. She gestured, and holographic images filled the chamber showing things that should not exist, and worlds being unmade, and stars flickering out of existence, and reality itself tearing apart like paper. Elf Woman said these images were from her universe and showed what the Void Collective had done to everything her people built over 10,000 years, and that they had consumed it all in just 1 century, and now they were hungry for more. The chamber fell completely silent as the council members stared at the images and tried such an impossible scale, and several of them looked sick as they watched entire civilizations disappear. The Krillian ambassador, whose carapace was scarred from previous battles against Celeste, asked why they should believe these images were real, and not just some trick to make them give her more power. Maya stepped forward and said that Celeste already had enough power to conquer them all, and that if she wanted to rule through force, she could have done it years ago, but instead she took only what she needed and moved on. The captain explained that taking resources and demanding tribute was not the behavior of a conqueror building an empire, but rather the behavior of someone desperate to gather materials for a specific purpose, and that purpose was building the weapon that might save them. Kate Morrison asked what would happen if they refused to help, and Celeste did not hesitate in her answer and said that in 5 years when the Void Collective arrived, they should remember this moment and remember that they chose pride over survival, though. Elf Woman said they would have a few seconds before being erased from reality to regret their decision, and then she turned to leave because she was done trying to convince people who did not want to believe. But Kate called out and asked her to wait and wanted to know what resources Celeste needed if they decided to help, and the Elf Woman paused at the doorway and said she needed everything. Ambassador Morrison looked around at the other council members and said they needed time to discuss this among themselves and to verify the information, and Celeste agreed to give them 1 week, but said that every day they delayed was 1 day less to build the weapon. Maya and Celeste left the council chamber and went to a private observation deck where they could see the stars spreading across the darkness, and the captain said she thought the presentation went as well as could be expected. Celeste said that humans were optimists, but that she had seen the doubt and fear in the council members' eyes and was not confident they would agree to help. The Elf Woman asked Maya why she was doing all this and risking her career and reputation to help someone that everyone else saw as a monster, and the captain was quiet for a moment before answering. Maya said it was because she had seen the truth beneath the fear and power and had recognized that Celeste was not evil, but just someone trying to save people who did not understand what they needed to be saved from. She also said that humanity had always been good at standing up for the underdog and fighting against impossible odds, and that those qualities seemed to be exactly what this situation needed. Celeste looked at Maya with something like wonder in her ancient eyes and said that the Allori had been powerful and wise, but they had never learned to trust other species the way humans seemed able to do. The Elf Woman said that maybe if her people had been more willing to ask for help and form alliances, they might have survived the Void Collective attack instead of being destroyed. Maya put her hand on Celeste's arm and said that dwelling on the past would not change anything, but that they could still save this universe if they worked together. The council deliberated for the full week, and Maya spent that time preparing additional evidence and meeting with individual ambassadors to answer their questions and address their concerns. And the 7th day, Kate Morrison contacted Maya and said the council had reached a decision and that they wanted to meet again with both Maya and Celeste present. They returned to the council chamber, and this time the atmosphere was different and less hostile and more serious, like people who had accepted that something terrible was coming and needed to decide how to face it. Kate stood and said that the council had verified as much of the information as possible. While they could not confirm everything about the Void Collective, they had found evidence that Celeste's story about the gate on Avalon 9 was truth. The ambassador said they had also analyzed Celeste's attack patterns over the past 20 years and determined that her behavior was consistent with someone gathering specific resources, rather than someone trying to build a traditional empire. Therefore, the council had voted to provide conditional support for building the weapon, but that Celeste would have to work with council oversight and allow human engineers and scientists to verify the designs and constructions. Celeste looked like she wanted to argue about the oversight part, but Maya gave her a look that said to accept the offer, and the elf woman agreed to the terms. Kate said they would begin immediately, and that every available resource would be redirected toward the construction effort, and that this would be the largest cooperative project in galactic history. As they left the council station, Maya felt hope for the first time in months, because now they had a real chance to build the weapon and stop the Void Collective before it was too late. Celeste looked at Maya and said she had been wrong about humans, and that they were braver and wiser than she had given them credit for, and the captain smiled and said that everyone underestimated humanity, right up until the moment they proved everyone wrong. The next 2 years transformed the galaxy in ways no one had imagined possible, and old enemies became allies, because survival required cooperation, and species that had been at war for centuries put aside their differences to work on the weapon. That might save them. All Celeste shared technologies that advanced entire civilizations by hundreds of years, almost overnight, and human engineers worked alongside alien scientists to understand principles of reality manipulation that should have taken generations to discover. Maya became the coordinator for the entire construction effort and commanded fleets that transported materials across dozens of systems, and she became the bridge between humanity and the Pale Queen, because she was one of the few people both sides trusted completely. They built the weapon at the edge of known space, where the dimensional barriers were thinnest and where Celeste predicted the Void Collective would break through when the seal finally failed, and the construction site grew into something the size of a small moon. The device was called the Void Anchor, and it worked on principles that most people could not understand, even after having them explained multiple times. But the basic idea was that it would seal the dimensional rift permanently and prevent anything from crossing over from that other place. Lauren worked as Maya's second in command and kept the logistics running smoothly, and Danny Carter flew supply missions that would have been considered impossible before the crisis brought everyone together. Kate Morrison visited the construction site regularly to check on progress and to report back to the council, and she told Maya privately that this project had united the galaxy in ways that decades of diplomacy never could have accomplished. But there were problems and delays, because some materials proved harder to find than expected, and certain technologies did not work the way Celeste remembered, and they lost 3 months when a key component failed during testing and had to be redesigned from scratch, with 1 year remaining before the predicted seal failure. Maya found Celeste on the observation deck of the anchor station, watching the final construction work, and the elf woman looked more tired than Maya had ever seen her. The captain asked if Celeste thought the weapon would work, and the elf woman admitted that she did not know for certain, because her people had designed it but never tested it, and they were gambling everything on theory and hope. Maya said that hope and gambling on uncertain outcomes was very human, and maybe Celeste had learned something from spending time with humans, and the elf woman almost smiled at that. Celeste turned to face Maya and said that she wanted to answer the question that Maya had asked back on Terminus 7 about why she had not killed her, and that the answer she gave at the time was not completely truth. The captain said she remembered, and that Celeste had claimed Maya intrigued her, but the elf woman shook her head and said that was a lie meant to hide the real reasons. Celeste explained that she had not killed Maya because for the first time in 20 years someone had looked at her and not seen a monster or a threat, but instead saw someone who was afraid and alone and trying to save people despite being hated for it. Maya moved closer and said that Celeste was not alone anymore, and that she had an entire galaxy working with her now. And the elf woman agreed and said it was thanks to one stubborn human who refused to show fear when any sensible person would have run away. The final year passed quickly as everyone worked desperately to finish the Void Anchor before the seal failed, and Celeste spent most of her time checking calculations and reinforcing weak points in the dimensional barriers to buy them extra days or weeks. Then the sensors detected the first major crack in the seal, and it was 3 weeks earlier than predicted, and alarms went off across every system as people realized that the Void Collective was coming sooner than expected. Maya ordered all military forces to defensive positions around the anchor, and every ship that could carry weapons was called to join the defense fleet because they needed to buy time for Celeste to activate the weapon, even if the cost was measured in thousands of lives, the breach opened like a wound in reality. Itself and things came through that hurt to look at directly because they existed in more dimensions than human eyes could process, and wherever they touched normal matter, it simply ceased to exist. Void Collective had arrived, and they were exactly as terrible as Celeste had warned, and watching them made Maya understand why the Alari had been so terrified, because these were not creatures that could be negotiated with. Or understood the battle lasted 3 weeks, and it was the longest 3 weeks of Maya life as she coordinated attacks and retreats and watched ships disappear from her sensors as they were erased from existence along with everyone aboard them. Thousands died buying seconds of time, and fleets were annihilated, but they held the line and prevented the Void Collective from spreading beyond the immediate area around the breach. Celeste and Sorrow stood at the breach edge, channeling power that made nearby stars dim, and the elf woman poured everything she had into the void anchor while her dragon protected her from the entities trying to stop the sealing process. Maya commanded the defense fleet and threw everything they had at the Void Collective to keep them away from Celeste, and she watched people she knew sacrifice themselves to buy one more minute or one more second. The Council forces fought with desperation born from knowing this was their only chance, and that failure meant not just death, but complete erasure from existence, and that knowledge made them brave beyond anything they had thought possible. When Celeste finally activated the Void Anchor, the effect was like watching reality heal itself as the breach began to close in the void. Collective entities screamed across dimensional barriers before being forced back to their own universe. Elfwoman burned the last of her ancient power into the weapon core, and Maya could see her collapsing even from across the T system. But the seal held and grew stronger, and the breach sealed completely with a flash of light that was visible across half the galaxy. The Void Collective screams faded away, and then there was silence, and the weapon had worked, and the dimensional barriers were now permanently sealed, and nothing could cross over from that dead universe ever again. The entire galaxy celebrated with festivals and ceremonies and speeches, but Maya went immediately to the medical bay where Celeste lay unconscious with Sorrow beside her. And the dragon colors had faded until it looked almost gray. Doctors from a dozen species tried to help, but none of them understood Alari biology well enough to know if Celeste would survive. And Maya sat beside the bed and held the elf woman hand and told her they had won 3 days later. Celeste's eyes finally opened, and Maya was there when it happened, and the elf woman looked confused at first before remembering everything that had occurred. The captain told her that the seal had held, and that the Void Collective was trapped forever, and that the galaxy was safe, and Celeste smiled weakly and said that humans had done the impossible again. Maya said it was not just humans, but every species working together, in that Celeste had been the one who made it possible by being brave enough to ask for help even when she expected to be rejected. The elf woman recovered slowly over the following months, and Sorrow colors gradually returned until the dragon looked magnificent again, and they stayed on the anchor station, which had been transformed into a monument to the Alliance. The Council voted unanimously to grant Celeste full citizenship and pardon her for all previous actions, because everyone understood that without her warnings and knowledge, they would have been completely unprepared for the Void Collective. New treaties were signed, and old conflicts were resolved, because the crisis had taught everyone that cooperation was more valuable than competition, and that survival required unity. Maya eventually returned to active duty, but she visited Celeste regularly, and they became close friends, united by the experience of having saved the galaxy together. Years later, when young humans asked Captain Maya Brooks why she had not feared the Pale Queen, she would tell them the simple truths. She explained that fear was what the darkness wanted because it divided people and made them weak, and that choosing to see a person instead of a monster was what had saved everyone. In her garden on a peaceful moon, Celeste would look up at the stars with Sorrow beside her and feel grateful for the stubborn human captain who had refused to be afraid and had given her something she thought she had lost forever. She had found a home among people who understood that heroes sometimes looked like villains, and that the bravest choice was often to trust when everyone else chose fear.